gentlemen, welcome back to the Turnbuckle session. Sam Roberts, how you doing, Sam?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. So this time I want to talk a little bit about especially your wrestling fandom. Let's talk about the early days, man. When did you first fall in love with wrestling? What are your first memories?
I mean, since I can remember, I don't have a moment that like I started watching. I know when I was a little kid, I think my older sister was watching. So I mean, I guess I was kind of always aware of it. And then probably around the time of WrestleMania 7 ish, like I start to really put the pieces together in 1990. So I would have been 6 and 7 years old, headed towards WrestleMania 7, because like I remember watching on TV Savage cost Warrior the title in the match against Slaughter. Um and I remember the entire Slaughter heel run and the Hogan storyline and everything. So that's kind of where everything starts to really click. Like I've followed completely hardcore since that time. But before then, just as a little kid, it's just like, whenever wrestling was on. I think the first pay-per-view I watched live from start to finish was probably SummerSlam 91. And then the first VHS tape that I ever just completely wore out was SummerSlam 90, I think.
No, that's awesome. So going back now as an adult, like those moments as a kid are those special places in our heart that I could still go back and watch all that stuff. What is your go-to to go back to watch over? Is it still SummerSlam 90?
Um, Not as much, I like to go back and look at stuff almost through a different lens. So, it's weird. The stuff that we watch over and over again as a kid, some of that stuff is still so ingrained in my memory just because I watched it so many times that I don't find myself going back to watch it as many because I already know like every single second that happens in it. But like, I love going back and watching old TV, like before the network existed. I got the bootleg DVDRs of like WWE superstars from 89 and 90 and 91 and 92. And now I'll catch myself on a loop, like to put something on in the background, superstars from like 91 and 92. Those early 90s and ironically enough, new generation era stuff, I find myself going back to a lot.
Yeah, I've just recently discovered that Wrestling Challenge was up there from like 86 and 87. And I've started watching all of them, the Piper's Pits with Hogan and Andre, and leading up to WrestleMania 3, because those
Yeah.
are ingrained in my memory from when I was a kid. But it's funny you say that. What you said is something true. Like I'll go back and watch stuff, and you watch it with the different, you watch it differently than you did as a kid. And I
Mhm.
find myself appreciating different people, seeing, wow, this guy was actually a better worker than I realized as a kid. Some of the things I don't think you appreciate. What have you noticed that with?
Well, so yeah, I mean that's a great question because I know when I was doing like when I did the show on the WWE network, one of the first things that I did was a monologue that I taped was a monologue about Doink in 93. Because like I'll go back and Doink is kind of one of those new generation characters that people kind of goof on because it's like, this it's just like pure WWE in 93 that you really thought you were going to get a wrestling clown over. But when you watch the original Doink portrayed by Matt Bourne, it is literally one of the best characters of all time. Like sitting and watching Matt Bourne commit to that Doink character and make it work. And then even going to like SummerSlam 93, because people, when they talk about Bret Hart, they'll talk about the tag match against Demolition at 90, obviously the perfect match at 91, SummerSlams we're talking about. British Bulldog match at 93, Owen Cage match, I mean at 92, and Owen Cage match at 94. But for me, I mean, if you really like watch it with no bias, Bret Hart SummerSlam 93, Jerry Lawler tries to get out of the match by having Doink fill in for him. And that match between Doink and Bret Hart is like excellent. It's so good watching these two just wrestle. at SummerSlam 93. So an appreciation for Doink for sure. I mean, my appreciation for Yokozuna has like gone through the roof. Like I always thought he was cool, and I always got him as an attraction because I would have been 9 and 10 years old when he was really hot. But like going back and watching him now and really thinking about how important Yoko was and the idea that he was a heel and the impact that he had as a heel and just how amazing Yokozuna was. Like I appreciate him so much more now than I did when I was a kid.
That's great. Yeah, 'cause I watched the special on the network, and that gives you a whole new appreciation. That was absolutely amazing. And you talk about, Matt Bourne is Doink, and you see this Ultimate Edition figure that I'm so glad we're getting. The way it captures his expressions, it's Matt Bourne's Doink.
Yeah, and I love that. I noticed that right away. I don't even remember if I said anything at the Comic-Con panel or not. I think I did. But like right away when you see the scowl, like the scowl face scan, that is Matt Bourne. And I go, that's the Doink that I love. I have back there, it's behind a couple things. You can kind of see it in the corner. Those are the original Hasbro reference shots. Those are the photos that Ron Rudat used to sketch the Doink the Clown Hasbro figure. So these right here are the original
Wow.
Doink Hasbro reference photos, not like copies of them, the hard photos that were taken from, the Hasbro designer.
Wow, that's crazy. That's awesome. So what are your favorite matches then as a kid? Do you have a favorite match or two? Like I think the what two things I hold near and dear to me always be Macho Man versus Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. Even though I was a Savage fan, I was disappointed that he lost. What a match. And then just Hogan slamming Andre. Like when I think back to my childhood, that's stands out to me.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of specific matches, I always loved Bret versus Owen at SummerSlam 94. I love the WrestleMania 10 match too, but there's just something about that cage match that's magical in the blue cage. Um, I, the WrestleMania 12 Iron Man match definitely gave me a new appreciation. It's so weird. These are all Bret Hart matches. And because I was going to say the WrestleMania 12 Iron Man match, the SummerSlam 94 cage match, and the SummerSlam 91 match between Bret and Perfect were all matches. Like that Bret Perfect match, I must have watched 1,000 times as a kid, just, rewinding the tape and watching it back and watching it back. Cause it's like, I had never seen a match like that. Like I grew up on WWE. So it's like, I wasn't watching super work rate, NWA type wrestling matches. I was watching sports entertainment as a kid, and that's still where I go. Like that's still what I'm a fan of. So the idea that I would have been, 8 years old, seven, maybe seven, watching Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect, and they had somehow found a way to get somebody like me, the kid that was there to watch these larger than life characters, start to develop the appreciation for the actual skill that was going on inside the ring. That was a very special match for me.
Yeah, that's a great one. And another thing people don't realize about Bret Hart is he was one of the final men in a WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal with Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
Him and the Anvil. And that's an epic moment because that's just a beginning for him. And to think he was in there with Andre,
Yeah.
that's a crazy moment too. I've gone back and watched that. I remember Bret Hart working dark, house shows at the Garden without his wet hair, without the slick hair yet. And it's just amazing, I don't think people really realize how long his impact was, like when he started. To say he started at WrestleMania 2, that was only the second WrestleMania.
Yeah, that's crazy. You really don't associate Bret Hart with that era at all. But yeah, I mean, I think Bret Hart, for as highly rated as he is still underrated. Like, I mean, I think Bret Hart is, for me, Bret and Shawn are the greatest of all time. Like, I can't say enough. And I feel like the older I get, the more I love Bret. Like, I just think he's so amazing. Everything he did from, I mean, 91 to 97 is like I mean, I guess 90 to 97 really, but everything, he started a singles run in 91. So everything he did as a singles in WWE is just unbelievable.
Do you prefer face Bret or heel Bret?
I mean, it's tough to say. I think I don't know because I was gonna say Bret's best matches were as a good guy, but then you go to SummerSlam '97. You go to it's not exactly fair because the heel run was such a short period of time. Basically, it's just that summer of '97 into November. But it was also like it probably was peak Bret Hart. Like he was still wrestling. He was wrestling at the highest level possible. But for the first time, he was doing promos that were the best promos on the show. Like Bret Hart did not do the best promos on the show before the Hart Foundation stuff. And once he did the Hart Foundation stuff and the anti-American stuff, I mean, yeah, I loved the heel stuff. But I mean, there's just so much of Bret as a good guy. That's hard to say.
It's a really, something I've heard being debated lately because that run as a heel was really amazing. And the best thing about it was he'd go up to Canada, he'd work exactly the same, and he was so over up there.
Yeah.
Like it was just amazing. And like you said, I Brett is just one of the best ever. And I agree with you. I don't know if he gets the due that he really deserves.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about it, the heel run was the first time that he got an extended moment to really be a top guy. Even when he was champion as a good guy, like it felt like it was always just holding the title until they could find a big guy to put it on, or Shawn.
Yeah.
It was holding the title and so they could put it on Yoko or so they could put it on Diesel or so eventually they could put it on Shawn. Like he never got the respect as a good guy, which is why the heel run made so much sense. Because if you really think about it, there was stuff for that character to be upset about. Like he was not appreciated the way he should have been appreciated, and he was being taken for granted. And so it's like when that character kind of becomes self-aware and that becomes the motivation to point out these people as villains in his own head, that's the magic of it, that you can find the truth in it.
That's a great point. And then, it's kind of funny. You end with the whole Bret Hart thing at the Survivor Series, and it's kind of like an epic ending to his WWE career. He got screwed over again in the end, and we got that amazing documentary out of it.
But also, like, you think about Bret, and part of what makes Bret so great is the people that he also makes great along the way, like the way he made Stone Cold great along the way, the way he brought out the best in the British Bulldog, the way he turned his brother Owen into a main event guy. Like that was part of what Bret was able to do. And in the way he was taken out of WWE, he made Vince McMahon the biggest heel of all time. So he never stopped. Speaking of Mattel, I'm super excited that they're doing the Survivor Series 96 Bret with the yellow piping on the singlet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want both that Bret Hart and the Hogan this from that Survivor Series. I'm super stoked about both of those figures. But yeah, it's crazy. Except Bret made everybody better. That's what a true professional wrestler is. Like he has a right when he brags that he never hurt anybody. The guy was probably the best worker we've ever seen. He really probably was. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to tell a story. Nobody threw a better punch than him in the ring. Like people getting into the business want to learn, just study Bret Hart videos.
And I mean, I think, for a period of time, like people made fun of him for it, but it really is a service to us as fans that he took it all as seriously as he did. The fact that it was real to him, while maybe within the industry, it was like, all right, Bret, get over yourself. That's why he was so good for us, because we were able to believe in the stories that he was telling because he really believed them.
That's true. And I'll mark out anytime I hear a guy who's like that, because as a fan, I love the guys who love it like that. To me, that makes them more special in my eyes. To me, it's one of the things why I love watching Broken Skull sessions with Steve Austin, because you see how much he still loves it and how he studies it. And I learn things just from the way he interprets things when he breaks down his interviews. Like that's one of my favorite shows to watch, the way he breaks things down.
Yeah, it's so amazing with Austin. Like he's just such a one of a kind, because it's just such an ego-driven business, wrestling. Obviously, any form of performing really is, and people fighting for their spots, and that mentality, I think, for a lot of people never goes away. But the idea that Austin does this show where he interviews current people, he interviews legends. But for somebody like Austin, who's the biggest, I think the biggest star of all time. Like you could debate Hogan, but I think Austin's the biggest star of all time. The fact that he prefers to make the show about his guests, like he could make it all about himself, and a lot of people would. But that
Yep.
his instinct is to make it all about his guests because he seems anyway naturally curious about his guests and the way they see professional wrestling because he loves professional wrestling so much. That's why I'm with you. I mean, I love that show. I haven't seen the Lashley episode yet, but I'm going to.
No, I haven't seen that one yet. I've seen every other one up until the last one. I can't wait because what he brings out, the way he points little things out in matches, like when he had Sasha and Bailey on, like it's just things as being a fan you don't get, and I love to hear a guy like his take that makes you respect different things that you just didn't notice before. So you grew up overseas. So
Yeah.
when you came, what was the difference from being a WWF fan there to coming here? Was there a big difference? Was it easier to be a fan here?
Well, so I grew up in the UK for from 1988 to 1992. So I moved back to the States when I was 8. Um, and it wasn't. I think maybe in the late 80s, I didn't catch. I think that's why my at the time I didn't start watching WWE earlier because in the late 80s it might have been a little tougher to get over there. But by 1990, 1991, it was on Sky Sports regularly. Superstars of Wrestling was on at 10 p.m. on Friday. It was either 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. on Friday night. So it wasn't like, back here, the other place I grew up was New York. So we had Superstars on Fox 5 at noon, I think, either 11 a.m. or noon. It was after the Saturday morning cartoons, Superstars of Wrestling would come on. But over in the UK, it was Friday night at either 9 or 10 p.m. And so it was past my bedtime. So every Friday, it was on Friday night. It was definitely on Friday night. It was on Friday night because every Friday I would put the tape in the VCR and I would make my parents record it. And then every Saturday I would literally wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and run downstairs and put my tape in. And that's how I watched, all the buildup and the coming off of SummerSlam 91. And what really is ingrained in my head is waking up at 5 a.m., coming downstairs, putting my VHS in and watching the build to WrestleMania 8 with like Flair and Savage and all the story and Hogan and Sid and the Royal Rumble and Tuesday in Texas before that, trying to figure out who the champion is, Jack Tunney and reinstate Macho Man and all that stuff was going on at this time. And like that first year of The Undertaker. And that's the stuff I was getting when I would put the tape in. And they had all the pay-per-views. They actually weren't on pay-per-view. They were free. Like if you had the channel in England, we had a satellite dish. So all the pay-per-views were included. And then luckily, as fate would have it, I was in England living there when the one pay-per-view they've ever had in England happened. So I was there in Wembley Stadium for SummerSlam 92. I got to go. It was my first show I ever went to. And it was amazing. Like it completely furthered what my fandom was. My parents were worried that I was going to go to the show. They're going to take me to the show because they got pretty good seats. And they were worried that I was going to see that maybe the punches weren't making full contact. Maybe there was a little bit more entertainment involved in this sports entertainment that I was going to kind of figure out what wrestling was and that I wasn't going to like it anymore. They were really worried about it because I was obsessed with wrestling and they were like, oh, he's going to figure it out. And like, they were blown away because I just sat there and I looked and, especially in that era before HD TV, when you would go to a live show and you would see how bright all these colors were and how loud all the music was and everybody was larger than life and just huge and enormous. And I became, if I was a level 10 wrestling fan already, I hit way past 25 after I saw it live. Like I was like, by that, I was an addict after that show. I was already, but I was obsessed going into the show. I was completely addicted coming out of the show. And so yeah, so then we didn't. It was tougher to get WCW. Like I would get WCW magazine, and I would read whatever magazines I could get my hands on in the UK. But it wasn't until I came over to the States again at the end of '92 that I was able to start watching like WCW Saturday Night and WCW Main Event and pretty quick. And then yeah, and then Raw started a month after a couple of weeks after I got back to the States. Yeah, so I was back in America for that.
Oh, that's amazing. That leads me to my next question. One of the biggest things when I was a kid, I got to go to MSG for the Brawl to Settle It All with Piper and Hogan that aired on MTV. I'm sure you've seen that.
Mhm.
And I could still remember the building shaking and how loud it was. And my dad saying, "Look, there's Mr. T in the crowd." Like in the beginning of the show, he was down there, and it was just amazing. And this Friday, hopefully, I'm going to be experience another moment as I head out to Chicago to see if CM Punk really returns or not, which all signs are pointing that he is. What are some of the best live experiences you've had? Loudest pops? I know you've been to a lot, so
Yeah, no, there's a lot of them. I mean, SummerSlam '92 is amazing because also like SummerSlam '92, you have to keep in mind that, and maybe it's just because I'd never experienced it before, so everything seemed louder. But it was in Wembley Stadium is an open air stadium, and it was like 80,000 people in this building. So to my memory, that's by far the loudest I've ever heard this music blaring and the action going on in the ring and everything. It was so loud and so like the pageantry was on another level. But yeah, I mean being in person for WrestleMania 30 was pretty amazing. I think the loudest pure pop that I've ever heard was being in Madison Square Garden the night that Triple H returned from his quad injury.
yes, that
Were
was
you there
amazing.
for it?
I was not. I just remember seeing it on TV and like
Yeah.
saying, "Wow, I've never heard anything like that."
Yeah, yeah, it was so cool. It was like they played on the Titantron coming up after the break, Triple H returns. And people were just like, yeah, and whatever. It was the commercial break, and then there was no announcement or anything. It just time to play the game, boom, boom. And like as soon as his music started, it was just like and just unreal. So yeah, being in the house for that reaction was pretty remarkable.
And the most amazing thing about it is when Triple H got hurt and left, he was a heel.
Yes, he was part of it. Was they had just formed Two Man Power Trip.
Yeah, and all of a sudden he comes back to that reaction.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I mean, that's why I'm excited for Friday because I think I might hear the loudest pop in person I've ever been to if CM Punk returns in Chicago with 21,000 people there. I think the roof is going to be blown off that place.
I would hope so.
What do you think it means to wrestling if he returns?
Um, I think it'll be really interesting because I have wanted him to return for a long time, and he should be the biggest star in the industry. So it'll be really interesting to see if he is. It'll be interesting to see number one creatively, like how he's brought back into the fold. Number two, if he's around all the time or if he's around sporadically. And number three, and I'm not so worried about number three, but number three is the amount of time he's been gone. Like those CM Punk chants lasted for years, but they have dissipated. Like you don't hear those CM Punk chants quite as much anymore. But all that said, like that's more just for making conversation. Like if I wanted to play devil's advocate, I could go that route. But yeah, no, I think look, I think that stuff happening in wrestling is really great. Like I love that there is stuff happening. That it's just like every single week there's just crazy things going on a regular basis. I think that that's the way wrestling should be, and I think that's the way you're going to garner attention. I think that the amount of talent that's out there now is staggering. Not only because you've got generations now that have grown up on wrestling and this is their dream, and they've worked their asses off to be the best, but you've also got guys that are now taking care of themselves and that are figuring out how to realistically be wrestling into their 50s theoretically without it being a mess. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you got so many guys in their 40s that are wrestling well into their 40s without, you know, you could make a comment about it just because you see the number on a piece of paper. But for the most part, these guys that are in their 40s still going, you look at them and you're like, yeah, they could go for another 5-10 years easy.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, I just think wrestling's in a really, really great place right now.
Dude, like I know we spoke about this last time. I feel like it's just booming like it hasn't in a long time. We're talking about indie stuff with GCW, and when does that ever become mainstream like this? Like wrestling is in the middle of something very special. So it's just sit back and enjoy the ride and take it all in as much as you can. Like I said, I've never traveled. You know, I live in New York too. I'm in Jersey now, but I'm from this area. I've never traveled to a show before like this. So this is exciting for me. And there's going to be more of this in my future because I'm ready just to take it all in and just enjoy it.
Yeah, people are hungry for it too. Like, you know, we've all been locked up for so long. It's nice to get out of the house and be able to experience it. And I think that we're not taking for granted anymore, at least in the short term, the ability to go and see a show, you know, like these moments, while a few years ago we might have been like, you know, I'll go to the next one or next time they're in New York or whatever, I'll go to this. But like the idea that you're like, I've been home for a year and a half, man. You know, I'm gonna whenever I can get one of these moments, I'm gonna try to feel it and be there in person. I think that that's what you're seeing.
Exactly, man. Thank you so much for your time. Just plug yourself, tell everybody where they can find you and your podcast. And
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and everything at Not Sam. My podcast is Not Sam Wrestling. Comes out every Monday wherever you get podcasts. And I have two YouTube channels. Not Sam Wrestling is the wrestling YouTube channel, and Not Sam is the non-wrestling YouTube channel. And Peacock. If you search Not Sam on Peacock, you can find my show, Not Sam Wrestling.
and honestly, guys, I'm sure you all follow Sam already. He's the best interviews in the business. So
Oh, thank
thank
you.
you so much for coming on, Sam. We appreciate it. Have a good night. Keep enjoying wrestling. Keep loving it.
You too, man. Thank you for having me.
Anytime, man. Thank you.